That's the original rock.
That
is the side of the cave that was originally here.
And that shows that the burial cave is much more intact than we thought.
Yeah.
There is a massive secret hiding directly under the tomb of Jesus, and the experts were so terrified they stopped digging right away. It all started with a floor that would not stop moving, and ended with a discovery that feels like a crime scene from the 1st century. Yeah, about that the researchers found something woven into the rock that changed the whole vibe of the site.
The team mapped the tiny watercourses and sewers that riddle the ground beneath the tomb. But this underworld also hides tunnels which aren't a part of the water systems. Tunnels which no one can explain.
Everyone is obsessed with the tomb itself, but what most people do not realize is that the real shocker is deeper down. This is a key detail you cannot miss. Ground moving under sacred stone. The sinking floor started with a subtle shift in the ground that nobody wanted to admit was happening. For decades, the custodians of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem had walked on eggshells, quite literally avoiding any major work beneath the tomb chamber. This is not just any building. It is a tightly controlled pressure cooker, where every single modification must be approved by the Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic and Armenian Apostolic communities. This rule is called the status quo, and it is ironclad. For example, there is a ladder leaning against a window that has not been moved since the year 1834, because nobody can agree on who owns it. Because of this, the foundations remained largely untouched and suspended in time. But here is the catch. In 2022, structural engineers noticed something terrifying. The marble floor surrounding the edicule, which is the small shrine enclosing the tomb, was moving. At first, it was just tiny cracks. Then, deeper measurements revealed the nightmare scenario. Parts of the floor were beginning to sink by several inches. The engineers realized the sections were resting on weakened fill that had compacted under nearly 2,000 years of pilgrims and construction. They warned the church that ignoring this could risk irreversible damage to the holiest site in Christianity. Basically, the church leaders had a metaphorical gun to their heads. The Greek Orthodox and the Catholics and the Armenians finally reached a reluctant agreement. Science was allowed in, but the leash was short. They could only fix the floor, and they had to do it fast. The atmosphere inside the church shifted instantly. Technicians worked in silence, fully aware they were entering a space sealed to outsiders for generations. Ground-penetrating radar was the first tool allowed into the space, and the scanner hummed across the marble, sending signals into the layers below. And get this, the readings were all wrong. The bedrock was not smooth. It showed dips and rises that did not match the expected layout. The radar pinged back echoes of cavities and empty pockets that had been untouched for centuries. When the first section of marble was finally lifted, everyone stopped breathing. Beneath the modern paving was not just dirt or simple repair rubble. It was dense and layered and untouched. They were not looking at a construction site, they were looking at a time machine. The discovery of the first anomaly forced the team to dig deeper than anyone planned. Wait until you see how deep the secrets go under the city streets. Buried secrets of Hadrian's temple. The team began removing the exposed layers, carefully expecting the usual mix of trash and fill from the last few hundred years. But that is not what happened. What they uncovered was a perfectly preserved timeline of the city during its most violent days. The first layer was easy and consisted of leveling mortar from the 20th century. Below that, they found fragments of Byzantine paving from the 4th century, which were remnants of the grand reconstruction ordered by Emperor Constantine. But then things got heavy. Literally, crews reached compacted rubble associated with a 2nd century Roman project. This was not just random rocks. This was a message of hate. The fill was dense and uniform, and linked to the effort of Emperor Hadrian to wipe the memory of the site off the map by building a pagan temple right on top of it. He wanted to bury the past so deep that nobody would ever find it again. The Romans had flattened everything to hide the history of the location. For the archaeologists, this was actually a good sign. It meant the layers below might still be protected by the Roman rubble. The crazy part is what emerged below that Roman layer. The soil shifted from construction debris to something industrial. It was quarry material which included fine dust and stone chips and heavy packing sediment. This pointed to active limestone extraction in the 1st century. Pottery fragments found in this layer matched jars and bowls used before the year 70. Basically, before this was a church, and before it was a temple, this area was a massive rock quarry. Ground-penetrating radar reinforced the finding and showed the subsurface sloping exactly like the quarry cuts found elsewhere in Jerusalem. For the first time, the area beneath the church began to resemble a loud and dusty industrial zone from early Jerusalem. It changes how you picture the scene. It was not a pristine field. It was a working site where massive blocks were being hauled out by human force. But the soil chemistry told them they had not hit the bottom yet. Just when they thought they understood the site, the soil color changed completely. The dirt started telling a story that the experts could not believe. Evidence found in ancient dirt. This is where the story takes a turn that stumped the experts. When the team reached the layer beneath the Roman debris and the quarry dust, they expected to hit solid rock. Instead, they uncovered pockets of dark and rich and enriched soil. It made zero sense. You do not find high-quality farming dirt in the middle of a stone quarry unless someone put it there on purpose. The texture and color were completely different from the rocky material above it. This immediately raised flags, because such soil appears only when people place garden earth intentionally in a location where nothing would grow on its own. It was about 2 feet deep in some spots. The researchers needed answers, so they sent samples to the lab for pollen analysis. The results were mind-blowing. The lab identified preserved grains from olive and grape plants, and that is putting it lightly. These were not wild weeds. They were domestic plants, which are the kind households in 1st century Jerusalem cultivated in small, managed gardens. This was a massive detail, because the ancient texts specifically mentioned the tomb was located inside a garden. The presence of cultivated plant pollen proved that this area was not an abandoned waste zone at that time. It was a maintained space cared for by someone with the money to import good soil. But here is the visual proof. When the soil was removed, the bedrock underneath revealed shallow plant beds carved right into the stone. They were arranged in a simple and organized pattern that was too intentional to be natural cracks. These beds matched the layout of small garden plots, often found near wealthy 1st century Jewish tombs. This implied regular visits and care and ownership. It was not a public graveyard. It was a private estate. The garden proved life existed here, but the rock cuts pointed to death. The rocks were about to reveal a place made for a body. Burial spot found deep below. The first exposed surface beneath the garden soil was flat and shaped with surgical precision. It was not a patch of natural stone. It was a cut ledge. The moment the work lights hit it, the archaeologists stepped forward. The ledge sat at a consistent height, with a smooth surface that showed controlled workmanship. It was a burial bench. In the 1st century, this was the standard operating procedure for Jewish burials. Families placed the body on the bench immediately after the end of life, for washing and spices. The bench here matched examples from known tombs around the city perfectly. Nothing about it looked medieval or Byzantine. It was the real deal. As the trench widened, a second bench emerged, and then a third. They were standing inside a U-shaped burial chamber. The chisel marks were the smoking gun. The strike showed the consistent rhythm of trained stonecutters and not random hacking. But then, they found the shafts, which are deep and narrow holes carved into the wall to hold the bones after a long time had passed. The presence of both the preparation bench and the shaft confirmed this was a complete system. But here is the weird part. On the west wall of the chamber, they found a niche that had been started but never finished. The carving stopped abruptly halfway through the cut. It was like the workers threw down their tools and ran. Some researchers believe this points to a sudden halt in construction. This could have been caused by a rushed timeline or an unexpected event. The incomplete niche supports the impression of activity carried out under extreme pressure. It was not a peaceful or slow process. It was frantic. The architecture was convincing, but the microscope was about to reveal something impossible. A tiny scrap of cloth was about to break the internet. Fabric left from 2,000 years. Finding stone is one thing. Finding fabric from 2,000 years ago is almost unheard of. The tomb had been crushed beneath later construction for centuries, so the chances of any biological material surviving seemed impossible. Even so, the technicians vacuumed the narrow grooves between the benches with micro-extraction tubes just in case. And get this, at the bottom of a groove trapped against the cold stone was a cluster of tiny fibers. They were faint and nearly invisible to the naked eye. But when the lab put them under high magnification, the room went quiet. The fibers did not look like root hairs or modern clothing lint. They had the twisted structure of ancient linen. This created an immediate firestorm in the scientific community. Linen degrades fast. Finding it intact meant the environment had been sealed tight. The team double-checked for contamination, but the samples were clean. They found more fibers on the edges of the benches. It was not an accident. Something woven had been laid out on this stone. But the real shocker was the chemical signature. Embedded within one of the fragments was a microscopic residue that indicated contact with oils. Not motor oil or machine grease, but biological oils. The signature resembled the breakdown pattern of aromatic ointments used in the 1st century. Several researchers warned that this was still preliminary, but the implication was heavy. We are not just talking about a carved rock anymore. We are talking about a body wrapped in linen and soaked in spices that actually lay on this bench. The fibers were a massive find, but the radar was picking up something deeper. Something was hiding directly under the feet of the researchers. Hidden space found underfloor. The team thought they had seen it all. They found the garden and the benches and the linen. But the ground-penetrating radar had one more secret to give up. The specialists began scanning the limestone slab that serves as the floor of the tomb, and they expected solid bedrock all the way down. For several minutes, the screen was flat. Then the monitor produced a shape that made the heart of the operator skip a beat. A clean rectangular void sat directly beneath the slab. It had even edges and a consistent depth. It was about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. It looked manufactured. This was not a natural sinkhole. It was a second room. According to the internal notes, the size matched a small burial chamber. Yet no map in the archives mentioned a lower level. Because they could not just smash the floor of the holiest site on Earth, they found a natural fissure, which is a tiny crack in the bedding stone. They guided a micro camera on a fiber optic cable into the darkness. The screen flickered and went black, and then focused. The reaction inside the command tent was instant silence. The chamber was perfectly intact. The floor was covered in undisturbed dust that had not seen a footprint in 2,000 years. The walls were clean, but in the center, the camera caught the edge of a flat limestone bench. It was sharp and pristine and unused. Through the small opening, the team managed to extract trace samples using a tiny vacuum. The lab confirmed it. They found more microscopic linen fibers concentrated in one spot, as if a wrapped object had been placed there and then removed. The room was sealed and hidden and empty. The science was done, but the questions were just beginning. Do you think this evidence finally proves the ancient stories are true? Or is it just a huge coincidence? What is your theory about the hidden room? Tell me in the comments. Please hit like and subscribe for more.